Hello guys, I hope you guys are doing good. So today we'll learn about a topic called data type. Okay, so what is meant by data type? So to understand Java data types, so what we have to understand is we need not to memorize a list. Okay, so think of them as a containers in a kitchen or a vehicles in a city. Okay, just like you have to store something, right? So for example, if you have to store numbers or whole numbers, okay, those belong to an integer family. Okay, so under the integer family, there are four types of primitive data types. So data types are generally classified into two types. One is primitive and another is wrapper classes. Okay, so what are primitive data types are? So under primitive data types, under the integer family, there are four primitive types. One is byte, short, int, and long. Okay. Now, when do we need to use byte? So which holds a tiny numbers. Okay. So byte has a smaller range. So which stores from minus 128 to 127. If you are not store from minus 120 to 127, then you will be using byte. So short is it is rarely used today, but it if it tells int feels too big and not a byte too small. Okay, which we generally don't use short. Okay, but it is rarely used today. Okay, fine. So int is like the king of numbers, unless you have a specific reason not to use this all for whole numbers. Okay, we will be using most of the time. We will be using int. Okay, now for example, I will give more examples when you go when we just go forward real time examples. Okay, now when you use long, so for example, if you have to store a massive numbers which belongs like distance to Mars, right, which is in millimeters. Okay, if it is very big, okay, such kind of numbers, very huge numbers, you'll be using long. Okay, and specifically what you mention is just to tell Java that you are using long, you have to specify L at the end of the word, I mean the number, so Java does not get confused whether you are using int or long. Okay, now if you have to store something called decimals, right, or a points, right, so you have to use either float or double. So float is good. So for example, you're measuring cup. Okay, good for decimals, but not perfectly precise. You will use, you must add f at the end. Okay. Now, for example, I'll take a better example. Okay, let's go in the bottom. What I mean to say is, okay, so okay, so for example, if you have to store a minimal number of floats, right? So for example, 3.14, you have minimal decimals after the point, right, so you will be using float. Now if you have more points after the decimal, after the dot, right, after the dot, so then you will be using double. So for generally the money or the money, right, so either use double or is there something called big decimal. Okay, we'll be using those data types. Okay, now there is something called double, I mean sorry, there's something called boolean. Okay, when we use boolean, so for example, you either switch off the fan or switch on the fan, or right, then so at the kind of it is you are storing true or false, that is true or false, right, simplest time. So when do we use character, you will be using characters like when you have stored like characters. So better example I'll give all these things, right. So for example, let's take in a real time example. Okay, so you're going to a Netflix. Okay, you, to make data type stick, let's use a real time world example. Okay, so what you're going to do is a digital movie theater booking app, you're going to use it. Okay, like Netflix or a Book My Show. So imagine we are the developer. Okay, you are the developer asked to build a ticket summary screen. Okay, then you have to use the right container, it means the right data type for every piece of information. If you choose wrong, what happens? The app crashes or the you might waste. money. Okay, the case study is like you have to do a movie ticket system. Okay, so for example, if you have there's something called 3D movies, right? Okay, 3D movies. So when you go to a book my show, it will ask you whether it is 3D movie or 2D movie, right? If 3D is enabled, you will say is 3D enabled, true. Otherwise you say false. Fine, in that case you will be using boolean whether to say it is true or false. Fine, real time use case. Real time use case is when this is a simple toggle switch. Is this a is this movie in 3D? Okay, now whenever you just logging into any of the uh, websites, right, like Netflix or any Facebook, right? Whether when you log in, you say user has been logged in. Okay, when you log out, you say user has been logged out. So boolean, when you log in, you case as true. When you log out, you will mark that boolean variable as false. Okay, now whenever you make a payment, okay, when you're on phone pay or something, right? So has the payment been successful? You either say yes or no, right? So that's why, so what you will do is, so for example, for that case, I have taken one sample example. Okay, so first let me finish it, then we'll go here. Okay, so what happens is, so there's something called int, right? Okay, now whenever you're going to a theater, okay, your seat numbers will be in numbers, right? So at that point of time, the seat counter will be, you will say available seats, that you give it as 42. Okay, real time use case, you don't need decimals for seats, right? You can't say like 1.5 or something, right, for the seats. So since most of the theaters have fewer than 2 billion seats, the perfect data type is integer. Okay, int. Now, the price of that ticket will be in decimals, right? Ticket price can be 12.99 or something, right? Money needs precision. Means precision in the sense, after the decimals, you have to mention some kind of precision, right? Like whether 2, 3 after the decimals, right? If you instead of 12, so if I use for 12.99, if I use integer, after that, whatever the value which is given late after the dot, right, the value will be skipped. So for example, if you use int, the price would be just 12, and the reader would lose dot cent of that 99 cents for every ticket. Or a million tickets, it could be a this much of 9 lakhs $90 mistake. Okay, so we have to use double in the case of decimals. Okay, now when you go to a theater, right, you have like A row, B row, C row, right, row categories. So under the F category, you are booking 42 ticket, right? And the ticket of that price is $12.99. Okay. Now, whenever you complete that transaction, you'll get some transaction ID, which is huge, right? Which is huge, right? So in that case, the transaction ID, you can store it as long. Okay. So globally, a booking app might process billions of transactions, and it is too small to hold such numbers, huge numbers. So we have to use long shipping container to ensure ID never overflows. Okay, when you use string, the movie title, right? Movie title you use string. Okay, so now if your age is as double as 8 bytes, right? So for example, uh, why memory matters, right? Imagine 10 million people are using your app at the same time, and if you store age as double 8 bytes instead of byte, right? Okay, if you're storing age as double instead of byte, which is a single character, right, you are wasting 70 megabytes of RAM for no reason. Okay, in the cloud, if you are using cloud, right, you might pay the for extra money. Choosing the wrong data type literally cost your company money. Okay, now let's take a real time example, right? So for example, so Netflix is the demo. Okay, now under this, what are the data types? So for example, name of the movie. Name of the movie can be anything. We can say RRR. Okay, So you have to store, so any string you have to store in, so for example, this is the movie name, right? So any noun, okay, noun has to be stored using string. Okay, now if I have to say, if I have to book uh, seat counter, okay, so which seat you have to want book? So you say 34. Which row you want to book? Which is character, right? So row. So I want to book F row. Okay, so single character, right, that you store in a data type called char, and the seat number you are storing in seat counter. Okay, and double or big decimal. So ticket price, you're storing in decimals. Okay, fine. So okay, now whether this uh, okay, so in Java, just remember one thing, that in Java, if you have to end something, you are going to end with semicolon. Semicolon tells that you are ending something here. Okay, for that line. If you don't end here, it will give an error. Okay, so next thing is like, if you want to store something called boolean. Okay, whether is 3D enabled, 3D enabled. You see, either true or false. Okay, 3D is enabled. Okay, now for this I'm saying movie title, right? So let's pick that, this movie title, and content, right? Content rating, what is the rating of that? Rating can be given in integers. So content rating is 5 or 4. Okay, so understand the importance of data types. So we have to pick correct data type for the correct values. Okay, you must have understood this. If you have any doubts, let me repeat it again. So whenever you want to store any noun, right, then you will be using string. If you want to store single character, right, so then you will be using char. If you want to store any whole numbers, right, so if it is okay, let me take one more example here, transaction id. So if I say int transaction id, right, okay, this will be huge. Like if I give this, it will give an error that you cannot store such huge numbers, integer number too large. So what I have to do, large numbers, transaction ID, I have to store in something called long, and I have to mention it L at the end. So that's so that you can store. Maybe this also has some larger things. So you can store in long. Okay. So large numbers, you can store it in a long. Okay. And if you have any huge numbers, I mean, then you're storing in long. If it is lesser limit, you will be either using, most of the time using int. For the character, I mean, in a theater, right, then like f row, which row. Okay, so let me just pick this to, so f row, you're going to book, first of all, which movie are you going to book? I'm going to book RRR. Okay, now which row you are going to select? I'm going to select F. Which seat are you going to select? 34. That is in int. Now, what is the ticket price? So before that, you will check whether 3D is enabled or not. Yes, 3D is enabled. What is the rate content rating of that movie? 4. Okay. Now, what is the ticket price? That is $34.99 or something, right? And what is the transaction ID? Once you finish all this thing, you're enabled a transaction ID. Okay. Now we are trying to print that. Okay, we are trying to print it. What it says, RRR movie has rated by 4 because content rating I've given 4. Movie title is RRR. So just to repeat again, like we are already running this public static void main. So compilation of that Java program starts from the main, and then if you check, the movie title is RRR, which is rated with 4 rating. So whatever the movie title you have given RRR is rated with 4 content. Okay. I hope you got this point. If you have still have any any